One, two, one, two, three, four.
Welcome, everyone. This is Joe Dagger, the host of the Business 901 podcast. With me today is Keatron Evans. He is the managing partner at KM Cybersecurity, a global information security consulting business which includes penetration testing, incident response management and consulting, digital forensics, and training. Keatron is also a senior security advisor at Savvius and a top-rated instructor for ISACA and ISACA. He is also one of the authors of Chained Exploits, Advancing Hacking Attacks from Start to Finish, a textbook still used by the U.S. government security agencies. Keatron, thanks for joining me today.
Thank you for having me, Joe.
You've been in cybersecurity for a long time, and I'm inquisitive. How'd you get started in it? And was it even called cybersecurity back then?
Yeah, so it was not called cybersecurity back then. Nobody really called it anything. It was just one of those weird IT things that was kind of buried amongst all the other things that IT and computer people did. So there wasn't really a cybersecurity, and there wasn't even really the word security associated with computers when I got started in it. But the way I got started is I was just very curious really early on. So I was actually doing hacking activities and doing things like exploiting systems before I even figured out that that's what I was doing. And it all started as I was growing up in Mississippi. You know, I grew up in a very large family. And my dad, didn't make a lot of money, so we couldn't afford things. So what happened is I was able to, to give myself internet access by taking the little net zero free 30-day CDs that they used to send out. And I would get those things and give myself free 30 days on like a library computer or somewhere like that. And I figured out how to very early on get into the net zero servers, get a list of all the accounts of everyone in the world actually that use net zero. So I was able to just hop around and pick an account and use it to give myself access just for, until I was able to afford it or come up with other ways to get it. And of course, back then, there wasn't any laws against it. Like nobody could come after you or anything like that. They would just say, hey, we noticed that you were doing this, stop it. So I was actually very early on hacking as a kid then and just didn't know what it was called.
Well, that's kind of scary that you could even do that back then with very little training, right?
Yeah, natural proclivity to find out how things work, I guess.
What's really changed in all these years? You said, about the laws or one day back then and everything, but I know that it's a totally different web now. But really, have the basics changed? Is there still people that just is inquisitive that like you were and tried to break in to give yourself more access?
Yeah, there's definitely still people like that. But some big changes that have happened is, number one, if you look at the last 20 years, we've evolved as to how much information we put on computers and how much information we send across computers. So the whole concept of cybercrime has evolved with that. The criminals are still doing the things that they did before we even had computers. It's just that now the information and the data they're after is in computers, so computers become now victims and tools of the crime. What happened is when I started in the industry, being a security person, it was rarely even heard of. So now it's turned into this big industry because as more data ended up connected and as more data ended up on the internet, there were more breaches. People needed to protect that data more. There turned out to be a huge need for people with technical security skills. And as a result of that, the industry kind of started to take off. So I was lucky enough to be one of the people that was in the industry very early on, and that allowed me to get a lot of headway and kind of become a little bit of a leader just from being in the right place at the right time. So that was a big part of it.
Well, I think timing is everything, isn't it?
Yeah, it absolutely is. It absolutely is. And the other half of that too is as the demand peak, then all of a sudden there was money involved in cybersecurity. And if you had these skills, you could go and make lots of money. And then that word got around. So now everybody that knew anything about computers are trying to get into cybersecurity now. And, just to give you a point of reference, when I taught my first ethical hacking class all the way back in 2003, the class would be made up of people that had at least 10 years IT experience, right? So it was people that were in IT for a while and they were coming into this to learn the security and this hacking thing. Well, now my average class, there's usually maybe 1 or 2 people out of 20 that have even more than 2 years experience in IT, and most of them have 0 experience in security. So a lot of the fundamentals of networking, the fundamentals of how memory works and all of these things, I have to teach that in those classes now, whereas back then that stuff was just common knowledge. So it just shows you how the industry has evolved into this very high demand thing. So now you have an influx of people coming in, some of them without any technical background, trying to elevate themselves really quickly into it. So that's led to a lot of demand for not just the consulting and the skills, but the training as well.
Well, I would like to thank you very much. What's the best way for someone to contact you? Is it through your website?
They can reach me on the website, or they can also just reach me at kevans@kmcybersecurity.com.
Okay. Well, I'd like to thank you very much, Keatron. I find the field very fascinating. This podcast will be available on the Business 901 iTunes Store and the Business 901 website. So I want to thank all the listeners for listening.
All right. Thank you, Joe.